Time is on whose side? Nearly 1 month on, Ukraine's resisting as invading Russian forces increasingly resort to the shelling of major urban areas, with an estimated 300,000 trapped in the besieged port city of Mariupol, despite shelling in other major cities that include the capital, Kyiv. The country refusing to surrender, and the Russian advance is slow going. Are we headed now for a long war? And what does a long war mean for Russia, where casualties are mounting, bread prices are on the rise, and there are reports of panic buying of staple items like sugar? What does it mean for Ukraine, where millions have had to flee, and whose infrastructure could be flattened by the time there's a decisive outcome? Finally, what does it mean for Europe, a continent that still can't believe that war has returned in this form? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the prospect of a long war. Joining us from the capital, member of the Ukrainian parliament, Inna Sovsun of the Holos Party. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
From the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, France 24 correspondent Gulliver Cragg is joining us shortly. From Berlin, Gustav Gressel, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
His exclusive on the fighting in the northern Kyiv suburb of Irpin airs Thursday right here. France 24 senior correspondent Cyril Payen is just back from Ukraine. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. More than 300 sorties by Russian aircraft over Ukraine in the past 24 hours. That's according to the U.S. Defense Department. And after last week's attack on a theater housing refugees in Mariupol, comes the bombing now of a shopping center in the capital. James Mulholland has that story.
Searching through the still smouldering wreckage in the hope of finding survivors. A few meters away, several bodies have just been pulled from the rubble. Parts of this Kyiv shopping center were completely destroyed by the Russian strike, which was so powerful that it left carcasses of burned-out cars spread over several hundred meters.
First, I heard a huge explosion. Then a flash lit up my room. I live right here in front. The explosion was so strong that it threw me out of my bed.
These CCTV images show the force of Sunday's strike. The shopping center in the northwest of Kyiv was a major supply point for residents of the capital. Several residential buildings, as well as schools and kindergartens, were also damaged. Witnessing the destruction the morning after, this Ukrainian army chaplain said he was stunned by the level of violence.
The Russians have exhausted the limits of my love.
Russian troops are still trying to take over the capital, their main objective, according to British intelligence. But in and around Kyiv, the invading forces are encountering significant resistance. The capital will again be placed under curfew from Monday evening.
Inna Sovsun, before I ask you about what's happening right now where you are, your reaction to the hitting of that shopping mall.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me again. I will specify, today I'm not in Kyiv. I'm in the western Ukraine. I came to visit my son for a couple of days. I was supposed to go back to Kyiv tonight, actually, and then they announced 48 hours curfew, so I'm a little bit stuck here, which my son is very happy about. So I was not in Kyiv last night when this huge missile hit the shopping center. Apparently, from what we know right now, is that on the very first day of the war, some of the Ukrainian tanks or other armored vehicles have been hiding in that shopping center, and some people just made photos of that and put it online. And thus the Russians were believing that this is the center where Ukrainian army is taking, hold, where they're keeping their armored vehicles, tanks, or anything like that. They were there only basically the first 2 days of the war, when Ukrainian army was still trying to regroup and to understand where to move. But apparently they were using the intel of more than 3 weeks ago when they targeted this shopping center. The shopping center itself, it's huge. It's in the amidst a newly built area with many many apartment blocks around us. It's 8 people died in that attack, as we know right now. The numbers may be growing. Many houses around that shopping center, they have their windows blown out. But not other major damage done to the structure of the apartment blocks themselves, which is a great luck. I frankly speaking, I have a friend who is living over there. She's not in Kyiv right now, but I had to call her and say if her house is safe and all. Her house is safe, but yeah, she told me that many people have their windows blown out.
Ina Tsofson, you mentioned that curfew that's gone into effect. France 24 senior correspondent James Andre reporting earlier how the part of the reason why this extended curfew and this drastic curfew, you need very good reasons to leave the house right now if you're in the capital. He was saying part of it is, and he followed someone looking for them, is they're looking for infiltrators. What's the mood right now in the capital?
Exactly. The infiltrators are those people that the Russians have placed apparently in a different period of time in Kyiv. Some of those people have rented apartments like 3 months ago, from what we know now. Some of those people are coming pretending to be regular citizens. Some of them actually speak in Ukrainian, so some of them are actually Ukrainian. And their job is to create different types of distortions in the city. And they can be doing different things. They can be finding the exact locations of specific places in Kyiv, or they can be here to open fire on a square, just randomly shooting at people to make everyone scared and afraid. I will tell you a personal story that happened to a family member, a distant family member, who is in Kyiv. And just 2 days ago, they were going close to the metro station, and they saw a guy who looked suspicious, and he was just looking around, and then he talked to them, and they heard from the way he was talking. He was speaking Russian, and many people in Kyiv speak Russian, but you can definitely hear the different accent. And he asked them, do you know where Dreamtown is? Dreamtown is another shopping mall, which is located in north of the city. And they said oh, we don't know, we are not local or something like that, but they felt suspicious. They went down into the underground. They found a policeman. The policeman came, they grabbed that guy, and that guy actually turned out to be one of those infiltrators. So that is as real as it gets for me. So it's like a distant family member, but someone I know personally who actually helped find those people. So apparently their main job is to help set the targets for the Russian missile attacks. And now they announced as of 20 minutes ago that 48 hours curfew started in Kyiv, where nobody is allowed to go outside. People were advised to save food, water, anything they might need. Even myself as a member of parliament, I wouldn't be allowed to go outside. The trains are not going in out of the city. No transportation is working because apparently they will need to look for those people, the infiltrators. But also, I believe that there will be some battles happening on the northwest of the city. That was the case last week when we had a 48 hours curfew, and I think that will be taking place right now. And they're trying to shield people from being under the fire when the battles are taking place.
Cyril Payen, northwest of the city, that's where you went and reported in Irpin.
Yeah, in Bucha and the Irpin district, we spent a few days there. And you're absolutely right by saying the pressure is really much now on the ground from the Russian tanks. The Irpin and Bucha are still in the hands of both sides, I will say. But for having...
So Irpin still has not fallen?
Well, you have this highway going to barely 15 kilometers away from Kyiv center, which huge bridge which has been destroyed by the Ukraine forces on the 25th of February, just to prevent the advance, this huge offensive, mainly by tanks and artillery. This is also where the world, the entire community, international community, saw these terrible pictures of civilians going through this Irpin river when it was snowing. So we were there. 1 week ago, Bucha was 70%, I would say, estimate, taken by Russian tanks. Irpin was 50-50 with a huge no man's land in the central Irpin, which is, I remind you, 70,000 inhabitants city, residential, with people living with pets, having some future, and you could see these civilians. And going back to the infiltrators, story, we could see a very much involvement of the security forces in the last days we spent in Irpin, of the checking of who is coming in, especially male. You had some terrible and sad scenes of people evacuating Bucha, Irpin, or Ostomel, but the security, the Ukrainian forces were really strongly checking who is who, documentation, passports, anything, checking weapons. So it was very much to confirm that the fear of saboteurs, the fear of infiltrators, like it happened in other cities, in Vasilkiv, for instance, where a school was hit, and we know that the commando was already there, and they fire randomly on people. So this is the huge thing, which is the new trend possibly, as we're going for probably a long period assault on Kyiv and other cities. And the sabotage factor is very important. So this is why we have now more and more curfew in the capital city, I guess.
Gustav Gressel, you penned a piece last week about how so far the campaign has not gone the way that Moscow had planned it. Is this, as events unfold, just how slow going is it in the eyes of the Kremlin, do you think?
Well, now they're in an operational pause. They have halted assaults on Kyiv or trying to encircle Kyiv for now. They're digging in. They're still pushing in Mariupol. They're still pushing in some parts of the Donbas, but basically in the northwest, the front has been static. A lot of the forces they have used in the initial offense are routed, so they have taken heavy losses and they need to regroup. They need a pause. They also have restructured their command structure, where they had made a lot of mistakes. And the second thing is, and I guess that Putin will wait for April, because April 1st is a very important draft date in the Russian army, and consequently, because the time of service is 12 months, so they will draft in new recruits, but old recruits will leave the service in the Russian army, and they are now approached or pressured to sign contracts to stay on. And these contract soldiers that stay on are then sent to Ukraine. So it will be a date for fourth generation, and you will probably see by mid-April new forces arriving, and these reinforcements could then sort of lead to the Russians renewing their offensive. And for now, they are basically holding the ground and try to bridge the time until then.
Yeah, because just to remind our viewers, at the outset, Vladimir Putin promising he would not send conscripts. Why did he say that, and is he sticking to that promise?
Well, sending conscripts to battle is something very unpopular in Russia in the first place. It was very unpopular in the first Chechen war, and there are sort of sensitivities and bad memories of that in Moscow, and they tried to avoid it. The second thing, of course, is Putin wants to keep the true nature of the war to those people who do not agree with it, and try to not sort of reveal as much as possible to the wider public. So if basically non-conscript soldiers are there who are voluntaries, who fight on a more ideological basis, at least as he thinks it is, he might do so. The problem is, of course, that a lot of Russian commanders just sign up their conscripts, sort of volunteer for them, just forge the signature and send them off. And these people are not really motivated fighting this war. And these are usually the guys that leave the tank somewhere in the forest and run. But that's another story, actually.
Another story or not. In any case, if we follow your timeline, that perhaps the next big wave of a ground offensive won't come until the start of the next month. What we are seeing is that Russia has air supremacy for the most part, and it is bombarding. There was a 5 a.m. deadline for raising the white flag in Mariupol, the strategic port city. That has come and gone. The shelling there continues with conflicting reports on how much or how little the invaders have ventured into Mariupol, where an estimated 300,000 remained holed up in abject conditions with basic medical care lacking and bodies in the streets.
Надеюсь, будет какое-то перезахоронение, что это какое-то временное мероприятие. Потому что военные говорят, складывайте куда-то в холод. А в холод это только в подвалах. В подвале люди сидят. В подвал к людям носить мертвых как-то это... Поэтому вот закапываем.
Значит, в подвале мы 11 дней, находимся 11-й день в подвале, а война у нас идет 25-й день сегодня. Мы каждый день считаем и надеемся на лучшее, на человеческое существование. Квартира разбита, все разбито. Вот с подвала куда нам выйти? На костре готовим.
Пока есть дрова.
Пока у нас есть какие-то дрова, пока есть какая-то еда. Через неделю у нас не будет уже ничего, никакой еды. Что нам делать?
Well, joining us from western Ukraine in the city of Lviv is Gulliver Cragg. Gulliver, how long can Mariupol hold out under these conditions?
I have no idea, Francois. I mean, how can I know? It's hard to know really what exactly is going on there and how far into the city the Russians have come. The Ukrainian Interior Ministry did confirm that Russian forces were in the city and that there were street fights and small arms fire, but whether that's just in one area or in other parts, it's really hard to know. People from Mariupol who I met today here in Lviv said that they had seen Russian forces in the city. Actually, their decision to leave, one couple that I spoke to, was motivated by the fact that Ukrainian forces came to their building and said that the Russian forces were nearby, though they didn't stick around to see whether that was actually true. But certainly it's not just bombardment of the city from far away. There is a ground offensive, we believe, going on, but we really don't know what the scale of it is. And it's all that harder to know now that the last journalists working for foreign media have left Mariupol. Yevgeny Maloletka and Mstislav Chernov were evacuated by Ukrainian forces who told them that the Russians had them on a list, planned to capture them and make them record videos saying that all the images and text that they put out so far was fake. I'm sure you've seen these people's photos, videos and read their texts.
And what's your reaction when you heard a minute ago Gustav Gressel sort of second-guessing the resolve of the Russian forces that are present in Ukraine?
Well, the Ukrainian media, you know, is absolutely full of stories of Russians being demoralized, of Russians shooting at themselves in order to go to hospital rather than die, of Russians surrendering. There are also periodically briefings in Kyiv given by captured Russian soldiers who talk about how much they regret what's happening or didn't know what they were letting themselves in for. But it's hard to know, again, how much all that is being exaggerated, how demoralized they are, because, of course, some of them are demoralized, that's for sure. But it's very easy to, especially if you want to boost a nation's morale, paint a picture as though that's really the scene across the board. I mean, I don't think there can be any doubt that this Russian offensive hasn't gone as planned. It wasn't the blitzkrieg that Vladimir Putin was hoping for, and the resistance from the Ukrainian side has been far more than what the Russians thought was going to happen, and I think has even surpassed most Ukrainians' best expectations. But from there to say that the Russians aren't going to be able ultimately to achieve their objectives is a different matter entirely. They've got possible conscripts they can draw on, they've got possible foreign forces they can draw on, Belarus might get involved. They have got a much better funded and larger armed forces than what Ukraine has. And it's hard to know also whether or not what's going on, the fact that they aren't advancing now on Kyiv or other places in the northeast, is this because they're stuck and they aren't able to do it? Or is this because this is a pause, they're getting their tactics together in order to better prepare the offensive when it comes?
Perhaps a pause. Ina Sovsun, your reaction? I mean, we're seeing the bombing of urban areas, demoralizing the populations by shelling and preparing for another onslaught, or are the Russians bogged down?
Well, I believe there is only one way to answer that question, is to wait and see. We frankly don't know how to make a prognosis anymore, how to forecast what will happen. But what I can tell you for sure is we understand the situation is not easy. We understand that we managed to stall Russians on way to Kyiv. Actually, your reporter was saying that about a week ago, Irpin was held 50-50 by Ukraine and Russian. It has actually changed in favor of Ukrainian army within the last week. And as today, Ukrainian army reported that they have retaken full control of a city western of a smaller town west of Kyiv called Makariv, which is again that has been going on to Russian and to Ukrainian side during the first 3 weeks. So I think the Ukrainian army around Kyiv is actually gathering forces, and the Russian army doesn't know how to proceed here, and that is why they're asking the Belarusians to come in and help. And the Belarusians seem to be trapped because Lukashenko doesn't want to send the army here. There was a recent polling done in Belarus saying that 97% of people in Belarus do not want to fight with Ukrainians. We don't really have bad blood with Belarusians. We actually, like on the national, like we are on good terms in general, except for them having another crazy dictator that wants to destroy us. But people in Belarus do not want to fight. But apparently Putin is pressuring Lukashenko to send Belarusian troops. Apparently what we are reading into this is that he doesn't have enough forces in Russia internally that can be used for further offensive in Kyiv. Again, he can be waiting for conscript. But conscript, as your expert was saying, is not a very popular thing in Russia. And Putin has actually been making claims that he didn't know that conscripts are being sent to war in Ukraine, which of course is nonsense, but he is truly afraid of saying that he will send conscripts directly into the combat. So I think he's trying to find ways to bring in other forces without engaging, conscripts who do not know how to fight. But it can be one of the ways he will have to proceed, because Belarusians have been going on and on about wanting to invade, but not going into the country, and they don't have any combat experience as well. So that is also true. I would say this, that except for Mariupol, overall Russians are doing very poorly on the ground, and the only thing where they have superiority is the air. And the air is, of course, the most scary thing. Like, we go to bed every night and we know that the air raid siren will go on at some point during the night. And we know that they will try to hit yet another town, city, village in any part of Ukraine. It is exhausting, but I wouldn't say it is demoralizing, because no one is willing, after this, is willing to say, okay, let's surrender. I will tell you for sure that right now the general mood in Ukraine is we have to fight them back and kick them out of our country totally. This is the general mood. And of course the airstrikes are terrifying, they're exhausting, but it doesn't lead to what Putin expected it would lead, to the general spirit falling, and people are actually even more willing to get engaged and to fight back. I was getting messages from Kharkiv. That's my native city. I grew up there. I graduated from school there. It's a largely Russian-speaking city. It has been under heaviest bombardment by Russians up until very recently. And I was getting messages from my former classmates saying, Ina, please tell anyone you know that we don't want Russians in our city. We don't want to surrender. We will stay in the bunkers, in the basements for weeks more if need be. Just don't surrender. That was the general mood in Kharkiv. And luckily, Ukrainian army did push them further from Kharkiv and stop those airstrikes by shooting down several Russian airplanes.
Let me ask Gustav Gressel about this. It's if you listen to Ina Sofsun, it's not going to plan for Moscow. But then again, let me play devil's advocate here. Does it have to go to plan? I mean, when a Western nation engages its forces in a foreign theater, it tries to limit as much as possible the number of casualties. Does a body count matter in Vladimir Putin's Russia as long as he's got the backing of the military?
Well, if you remember how the Soviet Union collapsed, it didn't collapse because Gorbachev was such a nice guy. It collapsed because there was a coup d'etat, and in the scene of the coup d'etat, several factions in Moscow would not support the hardcore forces that came out of the KGB and tried to take power. And especially the Red Army, or units of the Red Army based around Moscow, didn't support the coup d'etat, because they have been going through Afghanistan, and they knew that if they would support these hardline forces, they would have to go to the Baltics and squash the independence movement. They would have to go to Poland to squash the Solidarność government. And the Poles already told them that they will have to fight this, and it would be another war of occupation as they just have fought. And so they decided, well, no. And I mean, the collapse of the Soviet Union is Putin's drama. It's the thing he didn't want to repeat. So Yes, he's not the kind of humanist who really dearly cares for human lives, but on the other hand, he of course cares for stability of the system. And that is of course hard to guess when he judges that mounting losses are too big to bear for Russia as a society and for the Russian system as such, and that sort of ongoing defeat or not victory. And that is his problem. He needs to win, while Ukraine just does not needs not to lose the war. As long as Ukraine is not losing, they're winning, and as long as he's not winning, he's losing. And that poses a problem. And at a certain point, he might really decide, no, okay, enough is enough. But it's of course hard to tell when that point will come. And as I said before, to my point of view, he's waiting for April. He's waiting to generate further forces. We've heard Belarus, which is of course not the most capable ally he can get, but it's the only ally he has, as other Central Asian countries have said no to this endeavor. He tries to generate forces, and we will see basically by next month how much he will generate and how much they will send. And if the Ukrainians can blunt this, then I think we will start to approach a time where Putin might think twice. But until then, I think he's just playing for time and trying to generate new forces.
And very briefly, Gustav, because we heard our correspondent Gulliver Cragg mention how it is also an information war. The U.S. this Monday saying it's got no independent confirmation of Russia's weekend claim that it fired hypersonic missiles at a Ukrainian target. A hypersonic missile is one that can hit a target up to 2,000 kilometers away. It flies at speeds of 6,000 kilometers an hour. But analysts in Washington don't see the point of using one in this conflict. What are your thoughts on that, Gustav?
Well, there are sort of many issues. So the military use of this, there are standoff missiles, and in Western Ukraine, the Ukrainian Air Force is still up and flying, and you have working air defense systems. On the attack on Lviv, the Ukrainians shot down 2 out of 8 cruise missiles that tried to hit the airport. So it's a high-risk zone. So the Russians resort for strikers there generally to standoff missiles, and the Kyiv is one of them. The thing is, the videos the Russian posted, firing it's from an old test, and the video they posted saying that this is the strike on a Ukrainian ammo dump is actually a strike on an old farm that has struck 7 days ago or 8 days ago. So we really don't know what they have struck and how precise it is. The problem with hypersonic missiles is that flying fast is easy. Hitting something is the more tricky thing for such a fast missile. The Kyiv is predominantly a nuclear strike weapon with a limited conventional role, basically against aerial targets such as airfields. So we actually don't know, and the Russians have never published any reliable data on what they actually hit or not. So I personally wait for satellite pictures that really tell the truth of what they hit and where the craters are. I'm actually quite interested in that because it will be the first assessment of this thing hitting anything.
All right, the bombing of civilian targets, as mentioned earlier by Ina Sovsun, it's happening in places like her native city of Kharkiv. It's also happening in the coastal city of Mykolaiv, where France 24's team filmed the aftermath of bombs hitting an apartment block. Further along in the Black Sea resort of Odessa as well. Odessa, where graphic designers, sales reps, IT staff find themselves learning how to handle weapons, preparedness for a civil defense force in full swing.
I work like a legal sphere and just like simple people. I don't know, like me and my family. I don't dream or realize that I must to take a gun.
Ukraine is right now alone. And people who right now is watching it should understand because right now war here, but it can be in your home, it's maybe with your friends and in your country.
Gulliver Cragg, we can't believe that there's war in Europe right now. It sounds like Ukrainians can't believe it either. Your thoughts on these white people who have these white-collar jobs and are now learning how to use a gun?
Yeah, well, I think everybody in Ukraine, really most people in Ukraine, were quite taken aback when this
I'm gonna cut you off, Gulliver, for a second because we're having a little bit of technical issues getting through to you. I'll put the question to Ina Sovsun. Your thoughts on this?
Well, you know what? The first day of war, after the bombs exploded, the first bombs at 4:30 in the morning, we were all so terrified. It's the scariest feeling ever. Like you start caring about where is my son? I need to relocate him, and so on and so forth. But then I couldn't cry. I was scared, but I couldn't cry. But I actually cried the evening of that day when I saw one picture, a picture of hundreds of people staying in line in military recruitment offices, signing up either for the regular army or for the territorial defense units. We have had over 100,000 people signed up for the territorial defense, which is voluntarily, in the first week of war. We have over 300,000 men who were living in Europe, but they returned back home to Ukraine with the single goal to defend Ukraine. This level of commitment is something that is so amazing to myself. Frankly speaking, even I didn't expect that. I'm looking at people in Kherson, in Melitopol, the cities that are currently under Russian control, and thousands of people go to the streets basically daily in order to protest and to say that this is Ukraine and we want Russians out. Like, can you imagine the courage of the people who just go there barehanded, they're facing the tanks, and they say that we want you out. They say it in Russian mostly, and they say it to those Russian soldiers. Actually, today we had this, it was a dramatic scene where the Russians opened fire on people on the street, and they shot one older man. We don't know his fate as of yet, but this is what the people are doing. And many people are getting trained to use arms. Many people are signing up for different volunteer activities. Like, everybody right now is doing something for the army and for defense and for resistance, be it surveillance, being humanitarian aid, being signing up for territorial defense, like anything that people are willing to. People are so willing to contribute because we understand we are fighting for our lives here. We don't really have much of a choice.
All right, war in Ukraine means fighting. Cyril Payan's long-form exclusive, The Battle of Irpin, Ukraine Diary, airs Thursday here on France 24. The war effort means more than fighting. For Ukrainians, there's the battle to boost spirit.
Let's ready to rumble!
If I'm walking tired, that means that I'm tired.
What's that dancing about?
Well, this is Bogdan Mura, which is an artist, and I come back to what was saying our guest about the sense of huge mobilization of the whole nation of Ukraine, involving some engineers, some artists taking weapons. And this Bogdan Mura, which is in the west now in Lutsk, when we took him back to his family, was willing to go to Kyiv because this is the place where he used to perform. And what it was interesting is when we crossed the country with him going into Kyiv, the first thing the first place in this ghost city, which is absolutely amazing. It was 3 weeks ago already. The city was ghostly with checkpoints everywhere. The first place where he wanted to go was a artist residency where hundreds of artists in central Kyiv are located. In central Kyiv, the name is Hotel. The artists were still here, but they were just making Molotov cocktails or building some barricades for the civil territorial defense. So this is the whole point of this chapter, which has not obviously prepared by Moscow and by Vladimir Putin. This is the whole nation engaging itself with the weapons, the means they have into the fighting. So the film is about these civilians, these people getting involved, not leaving the country, trying to fight with their own means, and also in the front line in Irpin, where we spent 1 week. the impressive defense, sense of resistance of the people. 1,500 people from all fields, all generations are here in the front line to prevent this huge military offensive to go in to, this is the Northwest Gate entrance and extremely important strategically to central Kyiv. And these people are just mobilized. They don't want to leave. They just try to help the evacuees. So this is what is all about, but which is really much reflecting this huge, again, immense sense of mobilization, national mobilization against the invasion.
Yeah, and I think we have the connection back now with Lviv and Gulliver Cragg. Again, Gulliver, this brings us back when you hear Cyril Payen talking about those artists who are now on the front lines, to that thing of, one day you find yourself suddenly in a war.
Yeah, well, some people in Ukraine, of course, were signing up for these territorial defense brigades. I presume I've got my normal voice back now, in the weeks before the invasion started. But most people didn't really think that it would happen on this scale. The United States was issuing these warnings, evacuating its embassy, telling Americans to leave, and other countries also advised their citizens to leave Ukraine. And the Ukrainians were mostly reacting in a way quite irritated by this, because it was damaging the country's economy. Even the president was saying things like that. And now we have the situation where almost everyone that I meet who I haven't seen since before the invasion started, people from Kyiv who I run into here in Lviv, and there are so many of them, I asked them, well, did you think that this would happen? And they say, no, not on this scale. No, we didn't. We thought that it would happen in Donbass, in the east, maybe, or that there would be subversive actions in different parts of Ukraine, but not the full-scale invasion. Everyone thought that the United States warnings were over the top, and it turned out that they were basically completely right.
Gulliver, earlier in the day, we had the German foreign minister saying that, because right now we're at 3 million refugees from Ukraine in Europe, saying that number in the coming weeks could rise to 8 or 10 million. Do you have a sense of this mass exodus? Again, you're on that road that leads towards Poland and Slovakia.
Well, there are people, and among them the people from Mariupol who I spoke to today, who certainly plan to move on and to leave the country. It's hard to quantify how many of them there are. I think that there are a lot of Ukrainians also who feel that it's their duty to stay and to keep this country running and to keep the economy going and to defend their country, and also to help the people in need in the most badly affected cities to make their contribution to the humanitarian effort. So for the moment, the flow of people leaving the country, I think, has slowed. And I don't know where we get these figures of potentially 8 or 9 million. I mean, it obviously just depends on how the military situation evolves. I have heard of some people who are already saying they plan to move back to the cities where they came from, because although they're not entirely sure it's safe there, or perhaps they're pretty sure that it's not very safe there, they don't really want to move abroad, and they can't indefinitely stay in dormitories or with relatives in places like Lviv.
Ina Sofsun, you're right now also in Lviv, as you said, to see the family. Parliament, I don't know when the next session of it is, and right now there's that curfew. Your plan is to go back to the capital?
Yes, definitely. I was actually, it's not sad, because again, here I can stay with my son, whom I missed so badly in the first 3 weeks. I haven't seen him. But the feeling that you want to be home, you don't want to be forced to move by someone else, is extreme. Like, I've had this feeling, I haven't been able to sleep in my own bed since the first day of war, because I was either staying with some friends, or then I came here, and I didn't want to stay alone. That was the first thing that my boyfriend, who rejoined the army, that is what he told me. He said, like, you should always be with some other people, don't stay alone at home. And also, I live in the north of the city, which was not safe, for at least in the beginning. So I want to be home. I want to be where my stuff is, where the house that I was building, where everything I know is. It feels very different right now. Like the last week I was in Kyiv, I was walking on the streets of Kyiv, and they're extremely empty. It does feel like a ghost city. Like, I go to the supermarket, and there is like a third of the selection we used to have before the war. The coffee shops are empty and so on. It does feel extremely sad. But also there is this very strong feeling that this is where we belong. This is our city, and we want to be home. I think everyone can understand that. Just try imagining that you are forced to leave with one piece of luggage and put everything that you own in one piece of luggage. and go nowhere and be nothing and not being able to work to support yourself or anything. Of course, people want to go home. I want to go home so very badly, and I'm planning to go back home and actually stay at my place this time. Just because it's so unfair what we are going through right now, and it's so disruptive for the lives of so many people. And of course, I'm the lucky one because my home is safe. There are, I believe, hundreds of thousands of people whose houses have been destroyed. They don't have a home to go back to. We shall have to rebuild that altogether after the victory.
After the victory, you say. Ina Sovsun, our thoughts with you and your family in these difficult times. I want to thank correspondent Gulliver Cragg, also in Lviv. Gustav Gressel for joining us from Berlin. France 24's Cyril Payen. Your full report on the front lines in Irpin airs Thursday right here on France 24. Thank you for joining us here in the debate.